Senator, I want to ask you about a vote that's happening to Saudi Arabia, the arms deal that the president pitched several weeks ago when he was in Riyadh. Why are you blocking it, and why are Democrats supporting you?
Senator Murphy and I have for a long time said that the Saudis are doing some things that we don't like. They've been funding terrorism. Hillary Clinton said in one of her emails to John Podesta, one of the ones that was leaked, she said we need to put pressure on the Saudis because they're supplying weapons, financial and logistical help to ISIS. So why would we give weapons to a country that's been funding ISIS? Second reason, they're bombing the heck out of the country of Yemen, just to the south of them. 17 million people in Yemen are on the verge of starvation. If we give the Saudis more bombs, we're going to have more starvation. And so I don't want any part of that. And if I can do any little bit to try to prevent famine in Yemen, I'm going to do it.
What about the Republicans who are supporting you? Which Republicans are going to come out in favor of this?
We've had 3 or 4 in the past, and I can't really speak for them. I know in the last bill that Mike Lee and Dean Heller were with me. We're hoping to get a few more.
And in terms of the opposition, the president likely would veto this, but what message are you hoping to send to President Trump with this blockage?
That we need to think through what we're doing. I mean, there's much evidence that the Saudis were involved in 9/11. There's much evidence that they've been involved with funding ISIS. And now there's much evidence that they've been indiscriminately bombing civilians in Yemen. We need to add all that up, and really we should be saying to Saudis, if you want to do business with us, you got to behave. So what I would say is we need behavioral changes from Saudis before they get anything. The other problem is the Iranians react to the Saudis. So when we give the Saudis weapons, the Iranians want more.
Let me ask you about that, because behavioral changes, the Saudis have cut diplomatic ties with Qatar in recent weeks. What do you make of that? Is that the right decision that they should be taking? And what do you make of the White House's response to that back and forth?
I think that both Qatar and Saudi Arabia have been involved with funding terrorists. So it's a little bit pot calling the kettle black for them to criticize Qatar. But I do think that we have to see a change in behavior. But if there's one country that has funded hatred of the Judeo-Christian ethic and the Judeo-Christian tradition, it's Saudi Arabia. Without question, around the world, in our country, in Indonesia, in Saudi Arabia, they are the ones funding hatred. And they've been doing it not just recently, they've been doing it for decades.
Senator, I'm hearing that later this week the president could ease back potential executive orders on Cuba under the Obama administration. Is that the right call for President Trump to do?
I think trade is the best way to avoid war. When I was a kid, I thought, oh gosh, we shouldn't trade with the red Chinese, with the communists, and that's what a lot of conservatives thought. But many of us changed our mind, and we are glad now that we trade with China. It's not always perfect, but trading with China makes us less likely to go to war with China because we're interconnected. I think the same would go for Cuba. Already Cubans are seeing an uptick in their standard of living from their trade with us. I think it's a mistake to go backwards.
So what do you say, though, to Republicans who are looking at that and saying, hey, wait a minute, the Castro is a dictatorship. The Castro regime is a dictatorship. So things have not improved. Humanitarian issues, a lot of the issues that you've raised about Saudi Arabia.
It's how you fix them. So do we fix them through war, or do we fix them through engagement? And I think engagement in trade is a better way to do it. Look, if you look around the world, how many countries have either dictatorships, lack of freedom of speech, lack of freedom of property and security of property? Probably 50, 60 countries. We trade with most of them, and I think our best way is through example and through trade, and that's the best way to try to change their behavior.
Later this afternoon, Attorney General Jeff Sessions, he's going to be testifying on the Hill. What are you going to be listening for? What are you going to be listening for?
I think that really we need to figure out that there are 2 investigations here. One is, did the Russians try to manipulate our election? I think the answer is yes to that. So we should then respond by trying to defend ourselves. We have to have cybersecurity. That's one separate question. There's a completely separate question. Did anybody in the Trump campaign have untoward, unseemly, or illegal contact with the Russians? The answer so far is no. And this has been going on for a while. The answer from Comey last week is the president's not under investigation. And I think that's what the president's been convincing about. He wants the public to know he's not under investigation.
Are the Russia sanctions bill that there was a deal met last night, bipartisan deal, is that adequate enough to respond to Russians?
I'm really not in favor of new sanctions on Russia now, or new sanctions on Iran.
How should we respond?
Well, the thing is that everything that we say that Russia has done wrong, so China does. China uses cyber espionage. China steals our intellectual property. China does a lot of things we don't like. China suppresses speech. China has human rights violations.
How do we protect our political institutions from Russian hacking?
That's different. Sanctions aren't protecting us. Sanctions are just saying we're pissed off and we're tweaking their nose. The way you protect yourself is you got to have cybersecurity. Everybody in the world who can spy, spies. Everybody who can get involved in someone else's election does get, including the West, including the East, including everybody that has the ability to. Look, we were listening to all of Italy's phone calls for 1 month. We were listening to Angela Merkel's phone calls. Everybody's spying on everybody. So if you don't want them to listen to your conversation, you got to try to protect yourself from foreign countries. In our country, we should try to say the government shouldn't have so much power to spy on American citizens.
Let me ask you about something that the German finance minister told Bloomberg earlier today, Wolfgang Schäuble, and essentially their argument was with regard to the president's position on NATO, sometimes you have to read between the lines, so to speak. Do you think that the president's policy and the president's rhetoric, specifically on NATO, are one and the same, or are they two different things?
I agree with him 100% that NATO allies should pay more of their fair share. We do everything for the world. We pay for everything at the UN. We pay for everything at NATO. And then when it comes to supplying troops, we're the troops. We are the world's policemen. I think it's about time that Europe shoulders a financial burden. And really, they're soldiers. If somebody's got to go to Ukraine, Europeans ought to go there. Why is it always Americans? So I'm all for people paying their fair share, and I think Trump's right on that.